Hey, it's Jordan with TYT Network. It is Wednesday, July 6th, and I'm here with a Senate candidate from the great state of Utah, Misty Snow. You have a lot of unique things about you. I want to start, first of all, the obvious. You're running to be, I believe, the first transgender senator ever elected. And you're also currently working as a cashier at a grocery store, which I thought was pretty cool. Tell me about the kind of the working class aspect. It's not usual that a grocery store cashier will run, much less you've already won your Democratic primary. You're now set up to face Senator Mike Lee in Utah. How did you get the motivation to run, and how did you have success in the primary?
One of the things I complaint I often hear about government is there actually is not enough working class people in government. And I think that as a working class person, I can be a voice for working class people. And if we want to have like win on issues such as living wage or healthcare or paid maternity leave, I think we really need people who actually understand why those issues are important. Far too many people in government, they're literally millionaires. They're bankers, they're lawyers, they're business owners. They're disproportionately made up of what we know as the 1%. And if we want to change that, I think it's very important to get more working class people in government. And I think that was one of my motivations for running. The other motivations, honestly, I just didn't like the other Democrat who was running because he was a self-described conservative. So I had this idea that if I think felt that I could get out of convention because a lot of the state delegates were going to be elected out of the same caucuses that we were picking the presidential preference. And I had a feeling that after the New Hampshire win for Bernie Sanders, that Utah would probably also give a big win to Bernie Sanders. And so I knew that a lot of delegates would be elected out of those same caucuses. I knew that a candidate with a really progressive message could do really well at the convention, and so I was able to force a primary.
I'm just curious because if you're working as a grocery store cashier, odds are you're not rolling in the dough and you're probably working either full time or close to full time. So, how do you successfully run a campaign with not a lot of money? What I read, you only had a couple $1,000s raised.
Well, I've actually had only been working about a couple days a week. I am full time, but I have been working out with my work, and now that the nominee, I've worked it out. I mean, they say as long as I work like pretty much one day a month, they'll let me. I'll be fine. I mean, I'll probably get work more like once a week just because I need to pay for my insurance premium so I can pay for my scripts and stuff. But so I'll probably be working mostly just Sundays because that's not the best day. There's not usually not a lot of events on Sundays. It's not a good canvassing day, so that'll probably be like the one day a week I'll be usually working. As a work class person, though, it does have some challenges. I didn't have a lot of money to fund myself. I'm not like a millionaire. I can't put a lot of my own money into it. But my opponent, he was a business owner. He took a lot of loans for himself. He actually outspent me about 4-1, but I still beat him by about a 19-point margin in the primary, which was pretty good. And I think it's really just that my message resonates. I'm talking about issues such as like, $15 an hour minimum wage, paid maternity leave, healthcare, clean energy, issues that really resonate with like working class people, especially working class people who are concerned about their families. So those issues, resonate. I was really strong on them, and other progressive issues such as women's reproductive rights and LGBT rights, obviously, and those also really resonate with a lot of the more progressive voters in the Democratic Party, and is able to get a big victory. And as someone who's grew up in Utah my whole life, I don't think that being trans is so much of an issue. Mormon conservatism is a bit different from like more mainstream religious conservatism. Is that in that it's a lot more libertarian. There's just kind of more, people don't care so much about that. They care far more about, if whether or not you're a good person, and if you're running, what kind of policies you're willing to advocate that will help them and their families. And that's really the message. So the message I really want to get out is that I am a candidate who's going to represent working class people and fight for working class people and their families.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I found kind of maddening during the Democratic primary, you saw a lot of Hillary Clinton supporters and her, painting Bernie Sanders. He's a one-issue candidate because he focused so much on income inequality and evening out the playing field. And I think there was really not a lot of talk about how that one issue has a lot to do with gender rights and social justice, and how economic inequality has disproportionately affected a lot of the social groups we consider in social justice, transgender, LGBT, minorities. Can you kind of talk about, as a transgender woman, the issue of income inequality? You know, I would consider you kind of a Bernie Crat or someone running on the same issues as Senator Sanders. How the economic inequality specifically was a hot button issue for you as a transgender woman.
Well, when you look at issues such as like low wages or like income inequality, people who are disproportionately making the low wages are disproportionately women, they're disproportionately people of color, disproportionately members of the LGBT community. So fighting to raise the minimum wage is a way to fight to help close the wage gaps experienced by those people, because they're the ones most likely to be working minimum wage or near or close to it. So I think, really advocating for those issues, is very important in that way. And then we talk about women, inequality of women. United States of America is like one of just 2 countries in the entire world that doesn't guarantee paid maternity leave for its mothers. So in the USA, like, the other countries like Papua New Guinea, like literally one of just like 2 countries in the entire world, besides maybe a couple of small countries where it's hard to verify their data. But, so in the USA, we have a mother is allowed to take 12 weeks off unpaid leave. So if they take that 12 weeks off, they don't get paid for like 3 months. So even if they made the same wage as a man in the same company, they'd only make 75% of him in that year because they took 3 months off because they had a baby. So that's also another contributor to income inequality among women. So really fighting for issues such as like raising the minimum wage, like paid maternity leave, as a way to really help kind of close some of the income inequality experienced by women and people of color, LGBT community. And it's also like said, and honestly, a lot of people, even in Utah, the law that resonates with a lot of people because there are a lot of working class people, like, who feel like Congress is represented. Polling shows raising the minimum wage is a popular issue. Polling shows, guaranteeing paid maternity leave is a popular issue. And, say Utah, we actually have the nation's highest birth rate. So that's a message that really resonates to a lot of mothers and people who are concerned about their family. So those are issues I really talk about a lot because they do resonate with a lot of voters.
Mm-hmm. You've kind of been strong in wanting money out of politics, like a lot of progressive candidates, even calling for, I think, constitutionally something or a law. Now, you look at the current field, with Hillary Clinton not being indicted, she's probably going to be the nominee. So you have a Democratic nominee who's pretended to be a progressive this whole time and a plutocrat pretending to be a populist. So in terms of trying to get into the Senate under either Hillary Clinton as president or Donald Trump, what do you think you're going to be able to accomplish? Because it seems to me that it's going to be kind of a business as usual type of thing with Hillary Clinton, who, for all intents and purposes, is kind of a pro-choice Republican, and Donald Trump, who the hell knows what he is.
Yeah, well, so that's an issue that's going to be really hard to pass at Congress. I mean, I can still introduce a constitutional amendment. I can still advocate for it on the chamber floor, and C-SPAN covers everything the senators do. So if I'm elected, I advocate for those issues. It helps raise awareness to those issues, helps give a voice to those issues. Other people see it like, hey, I didn't realize that's an issue, and that helps create political will. I know at TIT you have something called wolf-pac.com, which is helping to try to draft like a state resolutions to call for a convention, call for a constitutional amendment. I think doing it at state level is probably the best way with things like with groups like wolf-pac.com.
We just added Rhode Island to that list of successes.
Yeah, I saw that because I actually subscribed to your YouTube channel, so I see a good number of your videos. I almost never watch a live show, but I do see like the video clips you post, a lot of them. But so I did see that update when Jen talked about it. But I think that's like the best way to really go about it. But even as a senator, though, I can introduce things like the Anti-Corruption Act, which is put forth by Represent.us. I mean, like said, even if we were able to pass like 89% of that, I mean, it'd be good. But as we saw, Citizens United, we saw with McCutcheon, Supreme Court can always strike down those laws even if we pass them. So the real way to really solve that is with a constitutional amendment long term.
Mm-hmm. And last, obviously, I didn't start with this because I don't want to be gimmicky that, you're transgender. But just for your personal story, kind of how did you evolve? I'm assuming you were born as a male. How did your transitioning process? When did you start to feel that you were really more naturally a woman? What was the feedback or response you got from family, friends? And, how does it kind of shape your perspective to then run for office?
I've known pretty much my entire life. I first expressed that I wanted to be a woman when I was about 4 years old and really didn't have much family support for that. And, didn't really transition until my late 20s. So it's much more recent. I would have loved to have been able to do it either earlier, but I never really had support from my mother or anyone, so I kind of had to do it, after I'd come to a point where I didn't feel like I had anything left to lose by doing it. But, so I think I've always felt, kind of oppressed. I think that helps me really have a lot of empathy for other, like, marginalized groups. Like, so I've been, one thing a lot of people talk to me about is, I've talked a lot about, like, issues related, concerning that people, that marginalized groups talk about. I talk a lot about income inequalities. Talk about prison reform and criminal justice reform. It's talked about how people of color in this country, we have this disturbing pattern where we have a majority-minority prison population, and we see that far too often where people of color are just being disproportionately stopped, searched, arrested, charged, tried, convicted, and incarcerated. We have a prison population that's 37% African American, 22% Hispanic, 9% Muslim. So it's a real problem where we have, starting with our police force, where there's racial profiling, where people who are African American, Hispanic, Muslim, or even perceived to be Muslim being, stopped and searched and arrested. And then when they get sentenced to the judges are more likely to charge them or convict or to give them a sentence. And when they do get sentenced, they're more likely to get a harsher sentence. And that's a problem that needs some serious reform. It's a hard issue to tackle, but that's an issue that I care a lot about.
And we just saw today, it's all over the news now, this man in Louisiana, an African American who, from all appearances, from the information we have, was pretty much murdered while by two police officers. They say he had a gun, but the video seems to indicate severe aggression. So this is continuing this theme of both police brutality, but also African Americans basically being treated as, subhuman.
As we actually had an issue, an incident in Salt Lake City, I think in February, a 17-year-old Abdi Muhammad. He was holding a broom handle and the police shot him. He ended up, I don't think he died. I didn't hear he was like really severely wounded, is in the hospital for some time. And a lot of people thought the police overreacted in that situation. That's here in my home city of Salt Lake City. So it's not an issue. That's just an issue that's a problem everywhere in the country. And it's something we really need to tackle. So a lot of people feel that, as someone who's also a marginalized minority, feel that I'm been a pretty good advocate. I'm not a person of color myself, but I think a lot of people respect that I am also a marginalized minority and that do have a lot of empathy for issues like that. And also, I know that trans people, I remember reading reports that they're also being disproportionately incarcerated. One report read, I said something like 20% of trans women have been incarcerated at some point in their life. So I'm lucky to never have been arrested or incarcerated, but I know that's a huge problem, especially for trans women of color. So because you have that intersectionality.
You're up against Mike Lee, who's about as Tea Party as they get. He, I think, came in 2010. He's a senator of Utah. Has pushed all sorts of austerity and trickle-down economics and all this. So talk to me about facing off with him. I think his approval's in the 30s or something, 30%. Now, what's the mood in Utah? Because traveling around the country, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't really matter. People are angry. People, are really being awoken to why their wages have stayed stagnant. Is economic inequality, you think, going to be the major issue in your race against Senator Lee?
Well, that's certainly an issue I will talk about because as someone as a working class person, I'm a very good advocate. I understand issues related to that, but like I said, the most recent poll has Mike Lee at 38% approval rating. And polling against him, I was showed just before I won the primary, I had a 37% to his 51%, which might not seem good, but I had almost no name recognition. And the 2012 Senate race in Utah, the Democrat 30%, 2010, the Democrat 32%, 2006, Democrat 31%. So polling at 37% in June is actually really good for a Democrat in Utah. And it is because Mike Lee's unpopular. They didn't like his government shutdown, which shut down national parks. Utah has 5 national parks, which is a lot more than most states have. So there's a lot of current communities that really depend on the national parks for tourism. And it was like their lifeblood, and he shut it down, and that pissed off a lot of people. I know, and I think our third most populous county, there's a lot of federal employees. Something like 20% of people were out of work during that government shutdown. So again, a lot of people were really hurt by that. Even if they're identified as Republicans or the registered Republicans, they don't like Mike Lee because he really hurt their livelihood. And then other people don't like that he's not really doing his job when it comes to like the Supreme Court nominees. Like, well, like I said, just give them a hearing, vote up or down. I think a recent poll showed that a majority of Americans want them to give a hearing. If they disagree with Merrick or whatever, they want him to at least have a fair hearing. Vote him down if you don't like him.
Right.
Then Mike Lee's also a guy who blocked aid to Flint. A lot of people felt that was, especially in a state where people are concerned about children and families, they thought that was a bit too far. Like, what do you have against children? So a lot of people, so there's a lot of dislike for Mike Lee. So I think there's an opening there. It's a presidential year. That usually turns out more Democrats in Utah. So that's helpful. And, Utah, so the Republican presidential nominee is Donald Trump. Of all the states that there was a Republican caucus, Utah was the state where he did the worst. Mm-hmm. He came in distant third with about 13.7% of the vote. So a lot of Utahns are not too thrilled about him, except for the ones who are thrilled about him. They've rejected Ted Cruz, and by extension, they've rejected Mike Lee. A lot of them don't like a lot of the Trump Republicans don't like Mike Lee.
Right.
So there's that opening there. Presidential hypothetical polling in the state of Utah actually shows that Utah is likely to be a battleground state this election. The most recent poll had it 35 for Clinton, 35 for Trump. So that's also a good sign because
Bernie was actually beating Trump.
Bernie would beat Trump, yes, if he was the nominee. He's unlikely to be the nominee. I mean, I guess something super weird could happen at the convention, but I'm not seeing it. Right. I guess you could hope he's vice presidential nominee or something. So there's a possibility that Utah will be a battleground for the presidency. And anytime a state's a battleground for presidency, other statewide races tend to come in play too, because that's that kind of, you have Republican turnout might be lower, Democratic turnout will be higher, and that creates the numbers. But also, one other factor I always point out, Utah is the youngest state in the nation. If you look at the age of people, over 18, like 46% of them are millennials. 46%. If Utah voters, 46% were millennials. The actual voters said like 30%. The politics in Utah would be completely different. I think if we can get millennials to turn out in a big way, I would also be able to really help close that gap. That one poll we were talking about with Mike Lee's approval ratings and me polling at 37%. The group that he did the worst with were millennials. So if I can get excited a lot of millennials, and a lot of people really are excited about my candidacy because I am speaking about issues that millennials care about, such as living wage, affordable college. Those are issues that millennials really care about. By talking about those issues, I'm really exciting a lot of people, and I think there's a lot of millennials that are actually kind of excited about the possibility of electing the first trans person in Congress. Because millennials, unlike older generations, they're much more liberal. Even the Mormon millennials, like you see as evangelical millennials, are more liberal on every issue.
Right.
So I think there's an opportunity there. We can really excite millennials, get a lot of people to the polls, get Democratic voters to the polls. And if Republican turnout's lower, I think there's the opportunity to make this a competitive race. And with all the media attention on me, I've actually gotten a lot of national press, which has been good for name recognition. It's actually been good for fundraising. A lot of the news articles have gone viral on all those Bernie Sanders pages. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that will continue. And if I can get this, say 50,000 those Bernie Sanders voters to donate $20 to me, I would have raised as much money as Mike Lee without having to take a single cent from corporations. So I hope to continue getting the word out there, and hopefully, we can run a race that where we can unseat Mike Lee in Utah, which would be great, because I'd be the first Democratic Senate candidate to win in Utah since 1970.
Right.
Not since Frank Moss was defeated by Orrin Hatch in 1976 have we had a Democratic senator from Utah. So I think it would be really good. And then, like I said, we could have a progressive senator. So I think it's important to really, continue reaching out to those Bernie Sanders donors, especially the presidential nominating contest winding down. It's if you care about getting Bernie Sanders' platform, in reality, make it a reality. It's time. The next step in the political revolution has to be trying to get more progressives elected to Congress. So I'm really hoping I can try to make that case to them and get them to support me in a big way.
Great. I happen to be a millennial, and I like you, so that's a good start.
Well, thank you.
Now, where can people find out more information on you?
MistyKSnow.com, MistyKSNOW.com.
Great. We appreciate you taking the time, and we'll check up later closer to the general. Thanks so much.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Jordan. I'd be love to talk to you guys again at TYT.